Hello and welcome to this demonstration of CubeDocs for IBM Cognos TM1. I am Michael Mackey, the Product and Practices Manager at Cortel New Zealand. Okay, I'm currently at the CubeDocs homepage, and as you can see on the screen I've got a panel down the left hand side which is essentially my contents page, which allows me to select from the different areas of documentation within CubeDocs. And then over here in the body of my page, I've got the ability to select from either the CubeDocs documentation, which is automatically generated based on your IBM Cognos TM1 source files, and the user-defined descriptions that you've entered as you've been documenting your TM1 model. I've also got this other documentation section, which allows us to link through to other relevant guides which are relevant to your IBM Cognos TM1 implementation. Okay, so the first area I'm going to select is model documentation. So essentially what this does is it takes you through a section which gives an overview of your model. First of all, we have this area here which tells you what TM1 objects you essentially have in your model. We've got 11 cubes, 34 dimensions, 20 processes and 2 chores. And I've got the ability to click on these hyperlinks and drill down to the different areas. Further down I've got information which identifies my TM1 server. So here I can see I'm looking at my CubeDocs sample server, and I've got my path to my data and login directory. I've also got the option to select my full configuration, and this brings up other information that's actually stored in my TM1 configuration file. As I go down, I've got a model overview diagram, which basically is a visual that just depicts the relationships in your model at a relatively high level. And then I've got different options for diagrams I can click on to get more detail. For example, if I click on the All Cubes one, I can see that I've got additional cubes in my TM1 model that don't have relationships. And I can analyze some of these lines. So I can see I've got green lines, which basically means my cubes are linked via rules. And I've got blue lines, which mean that there are processes in between my balance sheet and KPIs cube, for example. So I can use this as my starting point for analysis. I can also click on one of these cubes to drill down to the actual cube page and analyze that relationship further. But I'm just going to go back. And down here I've essentially got my cubes and dimensions matrix, which basically just shows me which dimensions are on which cubes, and I can essentially pivot around and look at that information in different ways. So that also allows me to assess, what my dependencies are. Yeah, if I just go back up to the top and I click on the cube section, what I can see here is I've got a list of my TM1 cubes, and I've basically got the descriptors next to them. So this basically allows me to understand or to read a short narrative which tells me what the function of the cube is. All this documentation is maintained within TM1 and is presented through CubeDocs. If I select one of these cubes, let's select the PL cube for example. So this is essentially the cube that I generate my profit and loss statements from. I can see I've got a description up the top which explains what this cube is used for or what its purpose is. And then I've got my dimensions down here, and again I can essentially drill through to any one of these dimensions to analyze it in detail. And then down here I've again got a diagram, but this diagram is a little more focused. It actually tells me my relationships between the profit and loss cube and other cubes in the model. So you can see I've got a series of operating cubes which are feeding into my profit and loss model. I've got an interesting linkage between revenue and profit and loss. I've got data flowing both ways via a rule or via several rules. And then I've got a relationship between the profit and loss cube and the KPIs cube, which is as a result of a TI process which transfers data from one to the other. And I can actually see that if I click on the process flows tab. That just expands that detail. And this basically tells me that here I've got a process, data KPIs, load KPI from PL, and data from the profit and loss cube is essentially flown into there. I can see that through the data source flow shown in red. and then I've got a blue line, which means that this cube is essentially being updated by a process. So I can depict, or I can see visually, what the processes do and what the dependencies are. I can also see I've got another process here, and I've got data flowing in from my FMIS data source, which happens to be a relational ODBC data source, and that's coming into my profit and loss cube too. Here I've got a detailed breakdown of the different cubes, which shows you some additional information. And down further I've got my rule file. And I guess one of the key things about CubeDocs is that it allows you to organize and narrate your actual rules as you're building them. So as I go down, I can see that I've got various rules and calculations. I can see a description for each of these rules, a name for the rule, and I can see the actual rule itself. So it just allows you to organize and document these constructs in your TM1 model. Okay, so that's essentially information relating to cubes. If I just jump out of there again, and I look at dimensions, what I can see here is a similar thing to what I saw for cubes. I can see the dimensions and the description relating to each dimension, and I can also see how this dimension is updated. And all of this information is essentially extracted through the files. So I can see that these dimensions are being updated here via a manual process, so someone actually goes in and edits them manually if they want to add elements to the dimension. And here for the cost center dimension, I can actually see that this is updated via a TI process. So if I just click on that one, I can look at that dimension in more detail. So here I've got a description of the dimension, I've got information, version control information about when it was last updated. And down here I've got all of the cubes which this dimension is related to. So as you can see, some of this information again helps you do impact analysis. You may want to make changes on your model, and you may want to see everything that's related to a certain TM1 object like a dimension. Okay, so once again I've got a visual, I've got a diagram. This one actually shows me my metadata flows, so it shows me all the processes which update this dimension, which is really useful. And here's just a list of the processes. Again, you can click on these processes by clicking on the link, or you can click on the diagram itself. As I go down, I can also see that I've got a number of attributes associated with this dimension. I haven't actually defined them, what they do yet, but I could enter that information within TM1. And then I've got an element definition section. I don't actually have any definitions for that dimension, but if I go to the top, I can select a dimension that I do have that information for example the asset measure dimension. And if I go down there, you can see that I've actually gone a level further and documented all of my elements as well. So you've got the ability to do that as well and build up a little bit of a glossary. Cool. So the same as dimensions, I've also got processes and chores. I won't spend too long on this, but here I can see a list of my processes. I can see a description for these processes, and then I can see all in one place what the underlying data source is. Is it a cube? And if so, I can link through to it. Is it an external system? And what's the name of that data source? So that's very handy information. And finally, chores. I can basically have a look at my chores. I can see information such as is my chore scheduled or not scheduled? What date was it first scheduled at? What time does it run? And what the frequency is for that. I can also drill further, and I can see my underlying processes with the actual parameters that they run that are set in the chore. And I can drill through to my process to find out more information about it too, what cubes it relates to and so forth. So that's just a quick overview of the model documentation.